Let me just look at the title again to get me inspired. Can emotions like jealousy, anger, and sadness oppose freedom? I think first of all, before I get on to answering that question, we first have to discuss who you are. I know we've discussed this many times in the past, but we shall go around the block one more time. So the assumption is for most humans living on this planet is that they are somebody living in time and that they've got this story about them. So they've got a story that they were born on a certain day, that they had certain life experiences, and that they're heading in a particular direction. So that there's things they want to achieve, there's things they don't want to achieve, that they're going somewhere in which they are planning. So you're going to get married, you're going to have a house, you're going to have kids, you're going to be grandparents, great-grandparents, you're going to have a job or a career. And there's nothing wrong with all of this, like these thoughts. But the assumption is that that makes an entity. So your actions in the future, your actions in the past, make a separate entity that's experiencing through this body now. So that makes a solid you, which is looking out. And that feels so real to people. It takes years sometimes of listening to non-duality to really hear that this you that you believe yourself to be isn't actually who's experiencing. It's an experience happening. So the thoughts and feelings arising of a person in time. So it's an experience arising, but it's not actually the experiencer. So the way that you can tell this is that everything that you think or feel is known. It's not the energy of knowing, it is known. Something knows that you want to be a doctor. Something knows you want to be a grandparent. Something knows you want a house. And also the same with your feelings. Something knows heartache. Something knows sadness. Something knows physical discomfort. So that's not the knowing. That's not consciousness. That's not a you that's conscious. That is something that is appearing in experience, and there is something that is conscious of all of that. So you that wants to be a doctor isn't conscious now. It's appearing in consciousness. Isn't that miraculous? So you always thought that you wanting to be a doctor and consciousness are one and the same thing. So that you're a separate entity inside the body being conscious. So your anger, say, at your husband or your wife, is an experience happening. So there's something prior to that which is conscious of it. So your urge to go to the toilet now is an experience. There's something prior to that that is conscious of that need and that want. So what happens when we're identified is that consciousness, it's, even though it's not really happening like this, but it's like a good way to sort of give some conceptual outlay of it. So consciousness and the personality structure become merged as one. So they seemingly become merged. So it feels like you are conscious as a person. And what happens in non-duality is there is a breaking of that. So there is a separation out of consciousness from the person. And there seems to be a moment where that person that you thought yourself to be, which is simply a functioning, can have some sort of knowledge of that big consciousness. So you have these kind of awakenings where you feel that you can know that you are consciousness, but that's still in the mind world. You as consciousness is unknowable, but yet it's known, but not intellectually. And that consciousness, when I say it's prior, that is simply a pointing. When that's recognized, the consciousness, there can be an energetic shift, and the body stops this contraction that makes it feel like consciousness is inside the body, and then maybe prior to the body at some stage, and then there can be this energetic explosion where consciousness is recognized to be all things, which is also nothing. So it's recognized to be nothing and everything. So who you are on the deepest level is nothing and everything. So total emptiness, and which is appearing as all forms. But it normally goes through these stages, but not all the time. You know, sometimes people have awakenings. They can have heart awakenings, they can have I am awakenings, consciousness awakenings, intellectual awakenings. There can be all types of awakenings. So prior to the energetic awakening that I'm talking about, so I'm pointing to is this energetic awakening, which I determine as freedom, but other people will call other things freedom. So some people might call, like, after all your karmas disappear as freedom. Some people might say that after guilt and blame and shame and pride and doership is freedom. And some people might say the intellectual awakening is freedom. Some people might call a heart opening as freedom. So everybody has their own interpretation, and none are right or wrong, because all are conceptual. You have to find your own right and wrong, which is totally contradictory. But what resonates in you, which is, again, like, who's this you? But maybe you can get an essence of what I'm trying to point to. So for me, what appears here is freedom is this energetic explosion back into everything. So it's a shift from being contracted to expansiveness. So prior consciousness feels like it's inside the body. And then there is this shift where consciousness is no longer contained inside the body. And also the sense of I am. So that sense of beingness is no longer contained in the body. So these two feelings, thoughts and feelings that are always there in experience are no longer contained inside the body but are everywhere. And this is an energetic thing. And it's just radically known in this moment, beyond thought, who you truly are. It just is that. Then so then it's exploded outside the body. So then it's like it turns inside out on itself. So prior, you felt like you were a vessel, this small vessel relating to a world. And then it's like you turn inside out and you become the world. And then there is this functioning of a vessel inside this you as the world. So you're looking through this vessel, but your essence, your feeling is expansiveness. But there is this functioning through a vessel inside of that. And that awakening, in my experience, changes the body-mind mechanism. So for me, there was a lot of change. But I also don't know what that will look like in other people. There can be speculation, and I'm sure I've speculated many, many times in the past. But in the end, I don't know what that looks like in each body-mind mechanism. When I look at things logically, I can see how there's still the psychology of Lisa playing out, which is positive and negative. So if I watch a program, animals being abused, then maybe I cry. Like me and Mum were watching this program about bears on the BBC the other day. And I couldn't take it, I couldn't hack it. Every time they showed bears in these cages to extract their bile, so like a lot of bears were brought up in these tiny cages, and then their bile was extracted for Chinese medicine. And every time that was shown, Mum had to fast forward, and I was like closing my eyes at it. So I see that as psychology of the Lisa being. So it's like her genes and genetics, and then also her social conditioning that makes her particularly sensitive to that. And also maybe being into the subject and being more sensitive to the environment. So I see that as psychology. I can also see the psychology, like my psychology of like the way I was treated growing up. So the way that my mom and dad treated me, I can see that tendency like very clearly in my interactions with people. And some of it's more compatible with humans and some of it's less compatible with humans. And I don't see any of it as right or wrong. It's just the way it is. Like it's the more conscious you become of your psychology and your way of being in the world, I think maybe the more easier your life can become, your social interactions and the setting up of your life. But I don't see anyone free of that psychology. So I know a friend of mine who had an awakening, just for an example, massive awakening, a massive shift. And I could see like a great freedom in their eyes. But I also could see that their pattern of being very distant from people still played out. And I could see also how other people could project onto them that that's what enlightenment looks like. Being very distant and emotionally detached from people could look like enlightenment to a lot of people. But from my perspective, like knowing their childhood, like their way of coping in childhood was to be emotionally detached. So enlightenment didn't fix that or stop that. But I could see that people can personify enlightenment and then think that's what enlightenment is, and that could be that could become very popular because a lot of people don't want to experience emotions or don't want to experience their psychology or their difficulties of relating with people, and so the idea of being emotionally detached could be very favorable. It doesn't mean that that person's being disingenuous with their awakening. It's just their particular way of being, and then they believe that that's the way it looks. It might be that my friend didn't actually, but it might be that they then teach and proclaim that's the way it is. So I don't tend to believe that you get to this state of perfection on the human level, but also in all humility see that I also cannot know that. So even though I say this, I can't really know that. So it could be that somebody breaks all their genes and conditionings and somehow maneuvers around this world without any of that. And I'm also open for that, although my instinct and what I've seen so far is that it seems impossible. That seems like it's highly unlikely going to happen. And I wonder if it's often that we like to promote this because of our fear of emotions and relationships with the world, with others, with our environment. So it's a fear of the pain, it's the fear of seeing a duck being killed to be eaten, or an aeroplane crashing and people in agony, or having a fight with our partner and not knowing how to resolve it, not knowing how to navigate your wants and your needs. And the reason that I try to incorporate this into my talks, I feel like I've always tried to, in my talks, exclaim that it's not about emotional perfection. I think in the beginning I harped on more about blame and guilt and shame and pride and expectation, but that was very strong conditioning from Roger and Ramesh. And I also understand what they're saying to an extent, because there is some form of personal doership which falls away. So there isn't the ability to blame or feel guilty or shame or pride or expectation in the same way that happened before. So it does change to an extent when it's seen that there is nobody. Like, who are we really blaming? But I also see it's relevant to have the feeling when somebody's inappropriate, to have a feeling of like, this is your fault and this is inappropriate. So, but that's maybe different from what they define as blame. But I just kind of lost all those words because I just felt like it was too much of a thing to make that out. I feel like it's better that when I speak, I'm teaching people to be more accepting of all their emotions and all their colors. like not seeing that as something to try and get away from, but something to embrace. Not to be ashamed of feeling sad or feeling worry or excitement or being upset about money problems. Like, these are very normal feelings. I think non-duality can help stop them escalating and become crippling, for sure. But I also think that the goal is embracing our vulnerability. And in embracing it, I think that stops it extrapolating out into many unexpected directions. Just coming back to that feeling and stopping it going into too many mind fields instead of mind fields. Like mine as in like those explosions, I think that was what they're called. So like coming back to the feeling. So if you're feeling sadness in the moment, really coming back to that feeling rather than going off into the story of it. Like it's their fault, it's my fault. It's just this rawness of, I feel shame, I feel sadness. But the story with it isn't necessarily truth. It doesn't mean that you don't say, I feel sad because I saw a bear dying. I feel sad because you shouted at me. It doesn't mean it's truth. As in, maybe the other person didn't shout at you. Maybe it's an interpretation, but that's not the point. Just coming back to the rawness of these feelings. So what maybe does go in that expansion is the addiction to really believing in the mind and believing in thoughts and believing that that is true and that is real and that is who you are. So that energetic shift takes out the power of the feelings and the power of the thoughts, but it doesn't eradicate them. From my experience, they have tendencies, and there's a narrator that's like, but it maybe like breaks that down quite a lot. I can't quite remember, but I'm sure that becomes inebriated. Is that the right word? I don't know. Inebriated, I think that means really drunk, but it becomes lesser. Sedated, maybe, the storyteller. Or this energy, this conviction in it. Yeah, and that's maybe the most defining thing, is that movement, but I can't be sure that this is the way for everyone, but that movement from the head to the heart. So when you are responding, you're so much more in contact with your body. So when someone's talking to you and there is hurt, you're not in the bickering like, who do they think they are? They're such an asshole. You're more in just the pain of feeling the embarrassment or the sadness. So it's more raw. So you're just stood there naked with them. Although they might be fully dressed and having all these stories about you. So that's most probably the defining quality that does go, is these illusory stories, these bullshit stories that you know best, that you're right, that you're somebody, that they're somebody. But there is still the body that has momentum. And the thing that's amazing about the body is when you go really deeply in the body, so when you stop living in the head and you go deeply into the body, is that the body disappears. Because where is the edge to your body and the world? Like, where is the edge to your feeling in the world? Like, so if you feel sadness, Like, where does that sadness start and stop? If you feel anger, where does that sadness start and stop? If you feel vulnerability, where does that vulnerability start and stop? It's the same with thinking as well. Like thinking, like, where is thinking? And we always think of I'm a thinker and I'm inside my head. But where is that? Who does that belong to? Is it inside or outside? And what is inside or outside? What does that even mean? But it doesn't mean, so the storyteller decreases to a lot, the lost in thoughtness, the belief in what you think decreases, but it doesn't mean you don't have a response. So if somebody's rude to you, that there isn't a sadness that appears. I don't know if you can hear the neighbours, they've got music on. Boom, boom. Where are my tissues? So say, for example, of what I'm trying to say is, let me shut that. I want to. So with the thoughts and the beliefs. So say with my burping now, I just freely burp on live stream. And you could interpret that many ways. You could interpret that as a passive aggression. Like she's being passive aggressive. She's doing a social unconventional, she's doing something passive aggressive. It's socially unconventional to do that. It's rude to do that. Like it could be seen like that. So it could be offensive. And then some people might find it liberating that I just burp and just let it out. I find that when I talk a lot, it makes me gassy. Like I burp, like I must swallow air when I'm talking a lot. So there could be these two different perspectives. You could find it liberating and making you feel more okay to be yourself. And you could also find it as like passive aggressive, like I'm debunking social norms in order to make other people feel uncomfortable. So for me, if somebody does something, like so say if somebody like burped in my face in mid-conversation and it really smelt and it made me feel uncomfortable. So I feel uncomfortable in that moment, and maybe I feel a bit disgusted, and none of those feelings are wrong. Like, and it could be that that person was purposely doing that to make me feel uncomfortable, and that's speculation. It could be that that person just lost control and by accidentally burped, and it could be that that person thinks that it's appropriate to express yourself. Like they could be a hippie and they think that it's appropriate. Like I remember in the Buddhist group, you were really taught to express your gases when they appeared. So we'd be in silence, and sometimes I'd be on these women retreats and it would be like honk, honk, honk all over the place, especially after lunch. And they saw that as appropriate, and they saw it as inappropriate to try and suppress your gas. So say with this one person, so say if they burp really loudly in my face and it's really smelly and I feel offended by that, there's nothing wrong with me feeling offended. Like there's nothing wrong with me, like that feeling like it crossed my boundaries. That's most probably what I mean by offended. Like it offended me. It made me, maybe I felt uncared for and disrespected. And that's totally valid, no matter what they're doing that for. So even if it was an accident, or they're doing it to be passive aggressive, or they're doing it because they believe that's what's right. So I can express that it feels offensive, and that's maybe like good thing to express if the other person's open. Like that made me feel vulnerable and uncomfortable and offended maybe. Like I can even maybe say that. But in my brain, I don't have a fixed idea that they're wrong or a fixed reason that they're doing it. I might feel like, yeah, they are doing it as a passive aggressive thing. And so maybe I could even express that they feel that they're doing it as a passive aggressive thing. But that doesn't mean it's true. It's true that I feel like that, but it doesn't mean that it's true that they did that. So neither of us are wrong in that. But it could create an argument because the other person might be positive they did that by accident. And maybe that's their conscious story. Maybe deep down they did do it as a passive aggressive game. And maybe on the surface they think they did it by accident, but maybe they really did do it by accident. But it doesn't mean that we have to like change our thoughts or our feelings. It's just what I feel. It doesn't mean it's true, but it also doesn't mean that the other person's is true. Normally what happens to us is that we convince ourselves something is true and we're not flexible to negotiation, and an emotion overrides us. And sometimes the emotion overrides me. Like I might get angry with that person or something because I feel like there's a lot of passive aggressive energy coming from them, whatever it is. But what happens when there's a disidentification with the self, it's like you take yourself less seriously and you know you can be wrong. And you're more open in that way, and you're more in touch with maybe what you feel. So maybe somebody else in that situation would straight away go into anger and like, how dare they, and blame and like lots of accusations. Another thing that I'm beginning to learn now with communication is that you don't have to come to a resolve. That I can feel like that, and that's totally valid to feel like that, and the other person can feel like they did it by accident, and that's okay to have this discrepancy in what we both think and feel. And it's great if you can express yourself, because then the next time that you're in that person's presence, they might realize that if they burp really loudly in your face, like the feelings that you go through, so they might navigate their behavior in a different way. So this is what I feel like non-duality does. But also, even in saying that, I'm not sure about this, that it makes things less personal, because maybe it doesn't. I can't say for sure how it manifests in the person. But from here, it seems like I can be quite flexible. Sometimes I can get reactive and be more like stern. No, that's inappropriate what you did. Like especially if it's like quite big what they do. They steal your house or something. Maybe they could be losing of a temper and more of a stern emotional reaction. But that's also okay. We all lose our temper from time to time. But then as it begins to settle, it's more flexible. But I can see like maybe somebody older that wakes up that's had really like strong dynamics and strong thoughts and strong energy before. Maybe that doesn't change. Who knows in the end? All you can know is about your own experience. And like, who is it that's judging, and who is it that feels like it knows better? It's a functioning that's happening in time. It's a personality structure that's based on previous conditions and genetics and human language, and it's just that. Like, who cares really? Who needs to be right? Like sometimes we need to be right or to be heard, but in the end, overall, who cares about it? Like from the perspective of the absolute, there is no caring. So it's like you have these human dynamics, but they become more ghost-like, because there's also this connection to something else that really doesn't care that can wipe it clean a lot quicker, can let go. It never held on in the first place. So it becomes this living with this absolute that's free, and then this relative that is relative and human. Yeah, I think I went on a long rampage then of speaking. So now maybe we can move to questions.